are listening to Barely Getting Started with Jason and Craig. Hey, this is part of our brand new segment. We're in our first series dealing with Belgian beers, Trappist ales, and all things great from Belgium.
Beer de Belgium. Yes.
Yeah. We're moving on into the Belgian beers and the Trappist ales, and we're talking about Rochefort Brewery. So it's going to be in the Trappist Rochefort in the. I already tried this once before in the Abbey Notre-Dame de Saint-Remy, located in Rochefort.
Beautifully said.
Rochefort,
Beautifully
Belgium.
said.
This is the ale that I have been looking forward to in this series. Why? Because the Rochefort 10 of their 4 beers that they make, this is the one that is, according to the many and the millions, I guess, is rated top 5 in the entire world.
Yes, this gets consistently, rated in the, 95 plus points. I think, Beer Advocate has it at 99, which means world class. Anytime you're in the 90s, you're a world class beer. And as I said on other podcasts, the pronunciations, please send them in if you have the correct pronunciation, because very difficult, especially with all the different languages and dialects of Belgium. But Rochefort 10 has always been near and dear to me. I tried it, and I was just... This is one of those beers where it's like, ooh. And every sip is a different sound of ooh. It's like, oh, ooh, ah. And that's just because there's so much going on. This is, the most popular, the most beers that I see from Rochefort are the 6, 8, and 10. Very fancy names, 6, 8, and 10. We'll talk about kind of how those names come about. Mm-hmm. But 6 is a triple. We did La Fin du Monde on a previous podcast, which was a triple style, not necessarily a Trappist. We're back to Trappist ales, and we'll touch base on that as well, just as a refresher. Mm-hmm. But we 8 and 10 are quadruples. So quadruple, also known as the Belgian Dark Strong Ale, mainly because it's exactly that, Belgian, dark, and strong. I think you had it listed. It is over 11%, 11.3% alcohol.
Yep.
And quadruples. So real quickly, let's run through which makes this a Trappist beer. Trappist, coming originally from Saint Benedict and the Benedictine monks that spawned Cistercian monks, which spawned the Trappist monks. So Trappist making Trappist beers. The 3 main things set by the International Trappist Association, which would dub an ATP product or an authentic Trappist product, would be that first and foremost, it's either made on the grounds of a monastery, so it's monastic, versus secular, which means not of a monastery. Then it also has to be under the supervision or brewed by the monks themselves. So not necessarily by their hand, but they got to be around, okay? They got to at least show up and, look at the beer. But that's one category. It also needs to be secondary to the function of the monastery. They're not there to, the rule of St. Benedictine at its foremost is to be selfless, and everything you do should be through prayer and your, duties to, being a monk and, your prayers, and less about worldly desires. Even so much so I talked about previously, you're not supposed to be openly laughing and, indulging in conversation. You speak when there's something to be said, but not necessarily, how I speak and how we barely even get started half the time.
No Trappist monks podcasts then.
No.
No.
I don't think, maybe within, the funniest thing, to talk about tangents, during the COVID pandemic, a lot of the monks, even though that, because a lot of people think that there's a vow of silence, but it's not necessarily a vow of silence. They're just speak when only needed. Right. So for the most part, they're silent. However, they do get some time to kind of walk the grounds with each other, so that they do have this kind of like brotherhood and, this feeling of community, because most of the time they're on their own doing their work amongst their peers, fellow monks on the monastery. But it's work. It's not. There's no fun. That's what basically it should boil down to. No fun. You're not here to have fun. You're here to praise God and do your duties. So as a sacrifice, they stopped walking around with each other. Not only do they not really talk, they don't really do much anything. They're just like, you know what? Since the rest of the world is kind of on lockdown, we're going to take our lockdown and lock down even harder. So they stopped taking their little walks on the grounds with each other. And I'm just like, oh, come on. Like, it's okay, guys. I'm not mad at you. I mean, I don't think COVID made it to the... Yeah, it's... Get your steps in, be able to just, walk. But no, so cheers to the monks for, being that selfless, and producing such great beer. So, the last thing is you cannot really profit from making the beer. It's to sustain the monastery, and then any residual income is to be donated to charity or, the local municipality to help those around them. So, check out our other episodes to kind of catch up on the timeline of beers. But basically in the 20s and 30s, 1920s and 30s, because we go back thousands of years with these monasteries. But Belgian beer was pretty bad in the 1900s. Competitions were held to get some better beers. And then the banning of Geneva with the Van der Velde Act in 1919 called for higher ABV beers. So now we're talking about 11.3% beer. That's equivalent to a lot of wines out there. Not the biggest, boldest wines. But, this one comes in just a 11.2 fluid ounce bottle. Kind of looks like our standard 12-ounce bottle. It's not... You don't typically see this in anything larger because it's 11.3%.
She looks like a little baby.
Yeah, she's it's very svelte, svelte little
beautiful
bottle
calligraphy
here
on the label there. So
yeah, everything with Belgian products, especially the Trappist, there's this artistry to it. A lot of intention, and you only brew a few beers. You think of the breweries where every week there's 4 new beers. These guys have 4 for hundreds of years, and that's also why it's some of the best beer in the world. They've had plenty of time to master their craft.
Fine-tune and perfect. Absolutely.
Chimay was actually the first. They brewed like a Christmas ale, and it was a dark, stronger version of the double. So Trappist beers typically single, double, triple, and quadruple. We're drinking the quadruple, shorten it up. We call it a quad. So these are, and Jason, you kind of brought it up, kind of compared to the English barley wines. Okay, the barley wine came about. One of the big things is we're in Belgium's what's called the grain belt or the beer belt because it's in a latitude that doesn't produce a lot of grapes. You've got grains are being grown much more so than grapes are being cultivated, and these are a lot of proud countries. This is Belgium, Austria, Germany. Great Britain is all up in there with, you got Ireland, the UK, the Netherlands. I think I got most of them there. Might have missed one or two. But, they don't really want to get grapes from the Italians. They don't need grapes from the Spanish. I'll drink some wine, but I don't really need anything from you. So the barley wines kind of came about because, all right, people don't think beers is sophisticated, so let's make a more sophisticated beer. So that's why the term barley wine came about, because they were brewing higher ABV, higher gravity, higher everything, adding nuanced flavors into it to create something as sophisticated as your best wines. So that's where kind of barley wine came from. This quadruple kind of piggybacking off of that a little bit. The Christmas ale. Think of it as that's where all those. When I think Christmas beers, I think of those baking spices. Your cardamom, your clove.
Yes.
Even like touches of cinnamon. A lot of these beers, you'll get notes of cherry, dark fruits. We were talking about the standard reference method or the SRM, the color of beers. This one, definitely some dark red, amber hues. It's more of a
very
dark brown chestnut in color with this nice red, amber, ruby base to it. It kind of just, glows like a nice a jewel. And it just, you could tell there's a lot going on just from the color and then the aromatics of it. I'm going to take a little swirl and sniff. A lot of these darker beers with the Belgian characteristics have dark fruit flavors. So dark cherries, figs, plum, And then when I think of these bigger alcohol, the alcohol kind of gives it almost like aged flavors. So instead of plum, sometimes it's prune. Instead of grapes, it's raisins. Think of the dried or the more concentrated version. Instead of apricots, instead of the regular apricot, you have your dried apricot. So a lot of those darker, more robust fruit flavors, not so light. So that's what makes this another one of those easy sipping, more sophisticated type brews.
Yeah, I like that. Cheers, my friend.
Cheers. So typical to most Belgian beers, a lot of carbonation.
Wow.
Dry, right? You got a lot of flavor on this, but does not finish very sweet. Sweet on the front end with some like cherry fig notes, but finishes dry. And a lot of people are like, they don't know what dry or astringent means. And basically what it just means is it doesn't, sometimes you drink something and there's that residual sugar where you kind of just still feel it in your mouth, or your mouth is still kind of satiated and wet, where this finishes where, man, did I even just take a sip, or it kind of just disappeared. You took a sip and there's such little sugar left, and that's a part of what the Belgian yeast does. It's a term called attenuation, or attenuates. Basically, the yeast just ate up all the sugar. One of the things that does make this same thing with doubles, they use candy sugar. It's called CANDI. I think it's derived from beets, so it's a beet sugar, and it's one of those like caramelized darker sugars. So you get a lot of burnt sugar, caramelization notes. Think of your like creme brulee topping. That's what I mean by like burnt sugar. So not burnt in a negative sense, just that really caramelized.
Yeah. Cooking it down.
There you go.
Yep.
Just delicious, desserty type flavors. So
this is wonderful.
It is. It is.
I'm a big aficionado of what I call a trail ale, raisins, maybe some nuttiness, stone fruits, and things like that.
Little gorp in there.
Yeah. But this is what it reminds me of. But this is so much this is incredibly smooth. And it's rich, but it's not overpowering at the same time.
So think about all the things you're saying here. Rich without being overpowering. Smooth with still being crisp. These are true indicators of a world-class, especially Belgian beer, that is just balanced. Everything about Belgian beer culture is go big, go crazy, put what you want in there, but it should balance. You shouldn't have, when we're drinking something, I love a hazy IPA. I love a crazy fruited sour, but they're so, one note intense. There's some nuance in there.
Sure. Don't
get me wrong, but balance isn't their key. That's why I like double IPAs more than regular IPAs, because there's more of a sense of balance. There's this higher ABV that then needs to be balanced out, and there's just this sense of balance. And
right.
Belgian beers really are the pinnacle of, wow, there's a lot going on, but it all kind of makes sense. And this beer, with its dark fruit notes, its rich candy sugar kind of flavors, this goes with your darker meats. This is great. Like if you ever went to a wild game dinner, or if you're having, if you're a hunter and you've got venison, if you're eating jerky, this has enough ABV, enough carbonation, enough everything to stand up to some of the gamier or some of the, the darker red meats. This is great with duck, anything that you would want to, or should I say canard, anything that, you can think of like a cherry sauce on it, or something with a gastrique, a very fruity, or you do kind of think of like Christmas time roasts and Christmas time dishes, almost like fruit cakes and stuff like that have these deep, intense, barley rich kind of flavors with subtle fruit notes and those nutty flavors that you had mentioned. The fruit cake is just, I feel bad for the fruitcake because it gets such a bad rap.
It does.
If you get a good fruitcake, it's actually funny. My mother likes, there's this Florida, I forget the name of the company, But there's a fruitcake company out in Florida that my mom, that's what she wants for Christmas every year, because she used to get it from one of our uncles that lived out in Florida. And it is fantastic. I mean, you take a slice of this, and it is just decadence. But it's been such a kind of like what we did with fast food. It was just more of a, all right, whatever's left on the bakery table, let's just put it in this fruitcake. But there's so many.
I used to say that. Let's pause crap in here.
It's the bar mat drink at the end of the night. You just pour it into a glass and shove it down. But if you think about all the things that go on in a well-made fruitcake, it balances out and ends up being this decadent treat, kind of like this quadrupel. And I always get these kind of fruitcake Christmassy vibes from it. And I love drinking this when there's snow on the ground. But not to say it's not a summertime beer. People will be like, oh, I only drink dark beers in the winter. And I'm like, well, it's more of a time of day for me. I'm not going to start drinking this at noon. This ain't a day drinker.
Right.
But
this is not a stout or a porter. This is a treat, honestly. And I dare say it's probably one of the best beers I've ever drank.
Nice.
And I'm glad I waited, because it was one of the ones when I was reading about it, I was looking so forward to it. And it's everything that I like. Like I said, I'm a big trail ale kind of guy. So it resonates that way for me. It's a beautiful beer. And
this is one of those ones I just gave my glass a little stir, a little nice little swirl. Boom. Back to a nice half inch ahead. There's tons of carbonation. That's what also makes Belgian beers very good for dinner, as dinner companions, because that carbonation really cuts through. So when we talk about flavors being able to stand up to your dark and roasted meats and some of these game meats, the carbonation does the same thing. It cuts through it. It acts as kind of like the scrubbing bubbles of beer to cleanse your palate. And to me, like I was saying, I don't see this being a daytime beer because it's 11.3%. However, this is one of those campfire beers. You talk about trail beer with the flavors of trail mix. I'm talking trail beer as in at the end of a nice hike, and you're at base camp or wherever you're doing, and you're at home base, and you start a fire, and you're getting ready to eat, and it's nighttime. You just want a slow sipper to kind of just go off into the evening with. That's where I think your quadruples, your barley wines, your stouts. That's where they really shine. And then of course in the wintertime, these are warmers. That's why there's a whole style called winter warmers. That alcohol and these flavors kind of just warm the body, warm the soul. Perfect for wintertime.
Interesting little history piece I wanted to bring up about this, because we talked about in the last episode about Acle Abbey and how they lost their recognition in 2023 because they ended up ultimately selling out to a private buyer. One of the things I picked up on the modern history when I was reading everything was that back in 1887, that Father, again, pronunciations, Anselmus Jadong from the Trappist Abbey of Acle came to the old abbey back in December of 1887. The buildings were bought by those monks of Acle, and then the abbey was restored with the new buildings raised and a new brewery was founded. But it would take until 1952 for that brewery to produce enough beer that would be sold, just like what we have here. So brewing being the main source for the monastery since the 16th century, and then that brewery was renovated in 1952 to produce a high fermentation beer. So they were sister. These are pronunciations that I don't get here. So Cistercian Order of the Strict Cistercian Order of the Strict Observance is known for their seclusion, and the brewery is not accessible to the public. So then in 2010, a large fire had destroyed a large part of that abbey. Though the blaze destroyed much of the building's timber structure, the monks escaped unharmed, and the flames did not damage the beer-producing facilities. So it would seem that Acle Abbey still has a hand in, well, at least on an ownership standpoint of Rochefort. And then Rochefort being...
The one thing that's nice about the Trappist community of monks is they kind of borrow each other. Westmalle, they I forget his name, Brother Tom. I believe it's Tom something. So we're just gonna go with Brother Tom. And
Brother Tom, I like that reference.
yes, but I do actually think it is Tom. So Brother Tom would kind of go to different Trappist breweries and help out. They wanted each other to succeed because, again, think about the rules of Saint Benedict is, everything's secondary, and it's like, hey, if your monastery is faulting because your beer production and beer sales aren't very well, come on in, brother, literally, to learn from us. We're doing pretty well. I forget which Trappist brewery it was, but it ended up there was kind of some turf wars here and there because these beers, talking about world class beers.
Yep.
Trappist, monasteries trying to start making beers, and they're just like, your beers are so good, get them away so we can start brewing. So I forget which actual monasteries it was, but they did kind of divide and conquer a little bit. And that's what's nice. And I think that's reminiscent of the beer community as a whole, where it is kind of like, one rising tide raises all ships. They kind of share with each other. And one of the reasons that ACL is no longer out, they lost their ATP, their Authentic Trappist product designation because the last monk, he left. And he may have gone to Rochefort. I'm not sure exactly where he ended up. However, he was no longer at ACL, so it was no longer the supervisions nor being brewed by a monk, but still on a monastery, so they could still call it Trappist, just an authentic Trappist beer. But then when they sold it to, Senior Frogs, and it was no longer held by a monastery or a Trappist organization whatsoever, it's sacrilege to call it a Trappist beer at that point, let alone an authentic Trappist beer. So, we do have, I think, 5 Belgian Trappist breweries left. We've got a couple in the Netherlands. America, we had our own for a little bit in Spencer, I think Massachusetts.
Yep.
But they lost their designation. They make a lot of jams. The big 3 are jams, jellies, the breads, and the beers. Bread and beer makes sense because they're basically the same raw ingredients.
Yep.
And then jelly, you put that on your bread. So they would make a lot of those, and then a lot of cheese. A lot of cheeses were made. You think, there's some livestock and, eggs and cheese being some of the biggest things that come off of a farm. But the other thing I kind of wanted to, dive into is just, these beautiful, beautiful names that they came up with. 6, 8, 10, and where did they come from?
Right.
So in brewing, and if you're, into making your own beer, you know about the specific gravity. So gravity of beer, if you ever hear the term gravity, that's they're all terms of how much sugar is in the wort. Wort is the liquid that we use to make beer, and yeast goes after that sugar. So there are different ways to measure that. 2 of the main ways were degrees Plato, and then there was the specific gravity. You'd have your original gravity and then your final gravity, because basically it's how much sugar did it start with, and then how much sugar is left over after the yeast has its way with it. And that's how you determine how much alcohol was produced, basically by how much sugar was used and then converted, and then the healthy, however healthy your yeast would produce a more attenuated, or like I said, it used up more sugar, so it would be a maximizing yeast strain, where it takes as much alcohol as possible from the conversion from the starches and sugars that we get from the malt. So degrees Plato is a measurement as a percentage. So if we heard 15 degrees Plato, that means by weight, the solution is 15% sugar. So if I have 100 grams of a liquid, and it's 15 degrees Plato, 15 of those grams are coming from sugar, and the rest is from not sugar, mainly water. So specific gravity is more of a proportion. So if we go back to degrees Plato, 0 degrees Plato is pure water. There's no sugar in it. Or, pure water would have 0 degrees Plato. It's not necessarily 0 degrees Plato means it's water, but water has a 0 degrees of Plato, if you follow me there.
Yeah.
Now, water has a specific gravity of 1.0. So think of it as the baseline. So as you set up the proportion, sugar in water is going to make it heavier. So the weight of the solution as a proportion to pure water is where you get your specific gravity.
Okay.
So 1.002, 1.04, or 1.1, we're increasing the proportion, which means, hey, there's more and more sugar in this solution. So it's much more used now, the specific gravity, because you would take your original gravity, then what's left, you take a couple marks throughout the, some readings throughout the brewing process to make sure you're on the right course. And then you're kind of brewing till you get to your desired final gravity, because then you've gotten the most out of the yeast that you want it to be.
Yeah.
And you started with enough sugars to get to where you want it to be. So there's kind of conversion between degrees Plato to specific gravity, and it's a 0.4 scale. So basically, if you take degrees Plato, say 15 degrees Plato, times that by 4 is 60, but then there's that good old point in there, so it's going to be 0.06. You end up with, that's 1.06 roughly would be its specific gravity. And then what's nice about gravity is it's roughly the percentage, okay? It's not exact, but if you hear something that's, that zero in front, that significant figure, oh my God, going back to 9th grade chemistry, that 0.06 would then mean it's approximately a 6%, going to be 6% ABV. And basically you can think as 1 degree Plato gives you 0.4% alcohol, so that's where that conversion kind of comes out. So if it's the same to get to degrees, your specific gravity, it's the same ABV you're looking for. So if you think of, this beer, if it had, a final gravity of 1.1,
which is what it has.
There you go, 1.1. It should be around the 10% or more mark, and that's where we end up with the 11.3%.
11.3. And the original Plato degree on this was actually a 22.5, which means there was a lot of cutting that needed to take place to get to where we were.
Yeah, the 22.5, I mean, if you think about that, that's going to get us to, 22.5 times 4. We're getting up there into the 90s. So, you end up after conversions right around that, 1.1. And then there was actually the Belgians, as a part of their taxation system, they had, which were Belgian degrees. Basically, it was an easier way to think about it. They just cut off the 1, and then the first decimal, usually they went to the second decimal or the hundredths place there. So if it was a 1.06 final gravity, or that was 6 degrees Belgian.
Okay.
And then 1.08, that's where your 8 comes from, because it would just be 8 degrees. And then your 10 degrees was your 1.10, bringing us to Rochefort 10.
The 6, 8s, and 10s.
So it's an obsolete measurement. They no longer use Belgian degrees. However, it doesn't mean that they still don't name their beers off of that. So that's kind of, so that's why as they get bigger, there's more alcohol, because it's all a part of that, all this interesting stuff that everybody was just dying to know.
Yeah, well, that's great history there, because that's to understand how the numbers work. Then why you can't go away from that and not be able to stick with the original scale. And I noticed also on the bottle here it has the ATP stamp on it as well.
Oh yeah, it is authentic. That's and we touched on this, and I think when we were drinking our Orville, we're not going to see these forever. I mean, again, being a monk isn't easy work, and talking about post-pandemic life where it's a little bit more focused on work-life balance. Mm-hmm. If work is life, then there's not much of a balance, and that's the quintessential life of a monk. So we're running out of monks, so either become a monk or at least buy a Trappist beer.
Right. It's like a Civil War nurse. There's not a huge calling for it at the moment. It's a lifestyle choice.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. So, and it's with the amount, we were talking about this, Jason and I, about Spencer out in Massachusetts.
Yep.
You've got the likes of, Sam Adams, let alone Treehouse, Trillium, Lamplighter. You talk about fantastic breweries out in the Massachusetts area, and, people aren't rushing to get Trappist beers like they are some of the hype beers, we call them of today. And there's nothing wrong with those hype beers. However, it doesn't bode well for Trappist breweries that are trying to sustain their monastery with their beer, because people like it, people enjoy it, but they're also not driving hours to go and load their cars up to get some of the beer, because it's just not as desired as some of the hype beers of today.
Right.
However, when you look on it as a grand scale, considered some of the best beer in the world. So tip my hat to the Trappist monks and anyone that puts others before themselves, and it's quintessential, and you can almost taste the love that goes into these beers.
Mm-hmm.
And anyone that brews these styles, you could still brew a quadruple. There's a lot of quads, and you do see a lot of them come around the holidays because it is kind of a festive beer. And in America, we're allowed to call it whatever we want because it's just the style. It's not a Trappist beer, but it is in the Trappist style of a quadruple or a Belgian dark strong ale. And they're, I really do enjoy the fourth quarter of the calendar year. I mean, we go and we start getting Oktoberfest, Märzen-style beers of the German culture, and then that leads right into our fall beers. I am a sucker for a good pumpkin ale or a sweet potato brown, and
Yep.
they're just, they just embody what's going on in the world around you, and not to the point like a pumpkin spiced latte. I just mean, it's fall in a glass. And
right.
then that leads right into our Christmas beers with, these liquid fruit cakes that have so many different nuances from one brewery to the next. And some are heavy on cherry, and some are heavy with their use of vanilla flavoring. And each one is kind of just a little journey in itself, and just delicious and enjoyable, especially amongst friends, kind of the way the monks would want it, at the table, being enjoyed with company, but not taking itself too seriously, Hence, we're just drinking a nice glass of Rochefort 10.
I like this. This will easily be in my probably top 5 beers. Definitely my first Trappist in my top 5 list. Yeah, this is wonderfully done. Yeah, thank you for introducing me to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
it's a nice one. It's not a huge bottle, and if you like this quad, the other, like I said, Chimay kind of came up with the first. Their Grand Reserve, or what they call the Blue Label.
Okay.
Their main 3 is red, yellow, and blue, which is their triple, double, triple, and quadruple. The red being their premier, and double. Their yellow being, I believe the yellow is their triple. If not, it's the white cap. And then the blue is definitely the Grand Reserve, which is their quadruple. And just fantastic beers.
thank you for introducing me to this. This is definitely fantastic. We got one more in this series coming up. We're gonna bring it a little more local, just a hop, skip, and a jump down the 90. You'll want to stay tuned with us because in 2 weeks. We're going to be sitting down as barely getting started as we talk about our good friends down the road, Brewery Ardennes.
Yeah, one of my... I'll talk a little bit more about how I came about it, but it was almost on accident. It was not my desired destination, but has just kind of stolen my heart. And I work very closely with the head brewer, and any chance that I get, I try to get out to Brewery Ardennes. So we're going to be trying something fantastic from them shortly, and again, we'll try to cover most of it, but we're barely getting started here.
Thanks. We'll talk to you in 2 weeks' time. Thanks for listening.